It's the car that saved Pontiac from the grave and introduced baby boomers to the open road. This three-letter legend hailed the beginning of the muscle car era, forever changing the course of American automotive history. I'm not lying when I say it's one of the most important cars of all time. Cue the lightning. This is everything you need to know to get up to speed on the Pontiac GTO, AKA the GOAT! It's the mid-50s. The war is over. Jobs are plentiful and people are having babies. Yeehaw! Things are looking good. People everywhere are optimistic. Everywhere except for Pontiac. The brand had been in GM's lineup for 30 years since its founding in 1926. Pontiac was created to fill the price gap between the entry-level Chevy and the fancier Oakland brand. Back then, Pontiac was a hit. There was no other company making a car that nice and that affordable. But decades had passed since then, and now Pontiac had a reputation for being a grandma's car. They were nice, but being nice wasn't enough anymore. Everyone was making nice stuff now. The clock was ticking for the company. For a smaller brand like Pontiac, they needed to do something different to sell cars. BUNKIE KNUDSEN was a strapping young lad and son of GM boss Big Bill Knudsen. BUNKIE joined the family business and was soon running GM's Detroit diesel engine division. Apparently, he did a good job because his promotion was to be the new head of Pontiac. He was tasked with saving the failing brand from the clutches of death and secure the Knudsen family name. No pressure. BUNKIE knew something that other automakers hadn't realized yet. Young people dictated what was cool, and what was cool sells. So BUNKIE took his grandma cars to the racetrack. Not just any racetrack, but the raddest gathering of horsepower on the East Coast, Daytona Speedweek. But this was 1957. Daytona Speedweek was just a big oval cut in the dirt. There wasn't any stands or nothing. It was a different time in motorsport. It was basically a big party where the only rule was to win. And win, they did. Pontiac driver Cotton Owens, God, names were so freaking cool back then! Cotton Owens scored Pontiac's first big dub in the boring grandma car. But since they proved they were faster than everyone else, Pontiac wasn't looking so boring anymore. Winning Daytona wasn't enough for BUNKIE. He got back home to Detroit and immediately started planning his next move for the brand. He wanted to put together a super group of engineers and execs to make Pontiac's next great car. He recruited Pete Estes and Jim Wangers. Then, finally, BUNKIE recruited one of the most brilliant men in all of Detroit, John Z. DeLorean! And the boys got to work. But before the team could make any headway, GM put a stop to all motorsport activity within their brands. It's the early 60s and racing was very dangerous. Drivers died all the time. GM, Ford, and Chrysler didn't want any bad publicity from the racing world. And they were a little worried that all the racing injuries would inspire Washington to write up some new safety legislation, which would cost the company money. So GM said to everybody, absolutely no racing. This was a huge setback. The Pontiac team's whole plan was based on being GM's performance wing. If they weren't allowed to race, then they might as well give up. BUNKIE and his team were like, okay. And they stopped making fast cars at the end. JK, come on. Them Pontiac boys weren't gonna let a little thing like rules or official company policy get in the way of building a badass car. All they had to do was find a loophole. GM's official mandate was that no engine bigger than 330 cubic inches could go into their mid-sized cars. But they never said anything about their small cars. The Dream Team decided to put their V8s from the big cars and stuff them into the smaller Pontiac Tempest. These Tempest Lemans were Pontiac's high-performance chariots. But the best was yet to come because the boys hadn't even used their biggest engine yet. In 1964, Pontiac bolted their gigantic 389 V8 into the Lemans. It's Le Mans because it's American, not Le Mans. 24 hours at Le Mans, Pontiac Le Mans. This fire breather changed the car's character so much that it needed its own name, something fancy. something to clue people into its racing character, something European. A few years before, Ferrari had used an alphanumeric designation for their Le Mans winning 250, and Pontiac would borrow it. The Pontiac Lemans Gran Turismo Omologato. The GTO was here. The GTO came with bucket seats to keep your butt planted, chrome valve covers and exhaust, and a floor-mounted 3-speed Hurst shifter. This thing was serious. The 389 up front made 325 horsepower and one hell of a noise out back. So it was fast, good looking, and cost 2,500 bucks. The equivalent of about 20 grand today. The Le Mans GTO inspired an entire generation of factory-built hot rods, sparking a little thing called the muscle car era. Every American manufacturer started building cars to compete with the new Pontiac. The Mustang, the Camaro, the Charger, they all started their lives in the mid-60s as a response to the hot Tempest. In the GTO's second year of production, it was restyled with signature vertical headlights, and in 1966, the GTO became its own model instead of an options package. 1967 saw the 389 get bored out to 400 cubic inches, as well as an optional rocket launcher and flamethrower package. What? The GTO's first major overhaul came in 1968. The vertical headlights went sideways and the body was styled to a more fastback fashion. Feeling his mission fulfilled, DeLorean left Pontiac the next year to head Chevrolet, which meant there was a new face in charge of the GTO, a guy named Jim McDonnell. Jim had previously designed conveyor belt systems for GM's factories, which meant he had an eye for optimization. What he didn't have an eye for was the youth, unlike Daddy. His contemporaries, BUNKIE, KNUDSEN, and John DeLorean, were intently focused on trends, but McDonald, not so much. Well, maybe one trend. In a March 1968 episode of the Laugh-In variety show, legendary comedian and musician Sammy Davis Jr. dances on stage singing "Here Comes the Judge," borrowed from the vaudeville act Pigmeat Markham. God, these guys' names are so sick.
Here comes the judge. Here comes the judge. Here comes the judge.
The routine sweeps the nation, with people imitating Sammy any chance they could. Jim McDonald saw this and said,
"Hey, these kids, they like this judge thing. Let's call a car a judge or something."
And so the 1969 GTO Judge was born. It was a stripped out version of the GOAT with rubber floor mats and a bitchin' Hurst shifter. It was no nonsense, like a Judge. The original GTO received more facelifts through the early 70s, including more aggressive hood scoops and flared nostrils. But the GTO was falling behind in the segment it had created. And by the time the oil crisis hit full force, the GTO was no longer its own model, but again, a package. This time for the diminutive? This time for the diminutive 1974 Pontiac VENTURA Compact. And that year would be the GTO's last. Until 2004, Pontiac found itself in the middle of a crisis with no identity of its own within GM. So they followed in BUNKIE's footsteps and decided to once again become GM's performance wing and bring back the GTO. But developing a whole new car is expensive and Pontiac didn't have the dough. But GM did have a platform to make it happen. They just had to go to Australia to get it. GM's Holden division had a two-door sports car called the MONARO. "Hey Pontiac, come get this thing, it's your new GTO." But it doesn't look like a Pontiac. "Put your grill on it, you'll be fine." Are you sure? "Yeah, do you want it or not?" I mean, yeah, we want it, but... "Okay, then do it, jeez, gosh, so picky." So, yeah, it was good. It's cool, but it only lasted 3 years. Not really a Pontiac. I don't really have much to say besides that. The Pontiac GTO is responsible for the muscle car era. It got baby boomers interested in driving and set the pace for the automotive industry for an entire decade and beyond. It is without a doubt one of the most important American cars of all time. Cue lightning. Can I get an eagle? How about a monster truck? Hot dog? Bikini babe? Anthem. America. We put out cool stuff every damn day, so hit that yellow subscribe button right here. You wanna know more about John DeLorean? Check out this episode of Up to Speed. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at James Pumphrey. Follow Donut on Instagram at Donut Media. I love you. Ugh.